Okay, thank you, everyone. Can we start with Gasho, please? Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. It's my pleasure this morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you're at, to introduce our guest speaker, Gregg Krech. I first met Gregg maybe 15 years ago when he spoke at one of our national ministers' Fukens. And at that time, I had just gotten married to Carmela, who was a psychiatrist, and she wasn't that familiar with Jodo Shinshu. And after I heard Gregg's talk, I says, I think this is a good way for you to begin to study Jodo Shinshu. And so she actually is certified now with Gregg's Todo Institute in Naikan. And both Reverend Harada and I, after we first heard his lecture, we thought, this is a wonderful way to speak about Jodo Shinshu in a secular version. So I'm pleased that he's able to come here. Gregg studied under Reverend Tsuji, our bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America, maybe 4 or 5 bishops ago. And he now is the executive director of the Todo Institute in Vermont. And so hopefully Gregg will continue to introduce himself a little bit, but I want to thank him for agreeing to take part in our seminar. And thank you, Gregg. So I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Reverend Hirano. And can everybody hear me okay? I'm assuming that if I don't get interrupted by Koichi, that you can hear me okay. So first of all, I want to thank you all for being here and giving up a couple of hours of your Saturday. And in order to take part in this, I'm very excited to be able to share this material with you, particularly at such a difficult time in the United States, but in the world actually also. And I'll talk about that for a few minutes. So one of the things I want to mention is I want to pay special thanks to Reverend Tsuji, who was the former bishop. He was the head of the Koji Temple for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to study with him for about 11 years before I moved to Vermont. And he really has influenced me probably more than anybody in terms of the work that I'm doing now. And after a few years of studying Pure Land Buddhism at Ekoji with Reverend Tsuji, I was planning to go to Japan to do my first Naikan retreat for 2 weeks at a place called Senkobo, which was not too far from Nagoya, just a short train ride. And I was talking to Reverend Tsuji the weekend before I went, and we had this wonderful talk, and I was very honest with him, and I said, you know, I've been studying with you all these years, and there's some things I think I understand about the Pure Land teachings and about Shinran's writing, but to be honest with you, I don't really have that experience in terms of feeling that I understand the teachings, that in Japanese, taiken, the kind of a body knowledge. And after I got back from Japan, when I did my retreat there, which involved every day reflecting on my life for 16 hours, facing a blank wall, when I got back, I had this sense that I was just beginning now to understand some of the teachings that had to do with, particularly with self-centeredness and selfishness, and our bono, our kind of evil or angry passions, that those now had some meaning to me on a very personal level, having gone through this practice in Japan. And it's something that I've continued doing for the past 32 years. So really what I want to do today is just kind of share with you some of my own experience, but also lead you through a process of doing this. So for those of you who want to try it out yourself, and we'll do actually a few minutes of that today, you'll have an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to see, Koichi was coaching me in terms of how to do this. I'm going to see if I can share my screen so you can see some slides that I'm going to include in here. Okay, and Koichi, if that's not coming through properly, let me know, but otherwise I'll assume that it is. I want to just make sure that I can. Oh.
You're looking good.
Okay. And I just need to see if I can move this little. Okay, that's better. All right. I also want to thank the CB staff, and Reverend Hirano just for setting up this whole seminar. And I want to actually mention the name of Reverend Don Castro, who I met initially through Reverend Suji, but he was the person that actually invited me to the Seattle meeting, and this was probably about 15 years ago, maybe, to speak about Naikan to the ministers. And that was really my first opportunity to meet Reverend Hirano, and later to meet his wife Carmela, the psychiatrist, and also to meet Reverend Harada, who is now bishop, and a number of the other ministers, particularly in California. So it really was the seed that launched my collaboration with many of the temples and ministers in the western part of the country. So I look back on that, and I'm very grateful for Reverend Castro inviting me to that event, and having some confidence that I wouldn't make him look bad, even though I probably did to some of those people. So let's see, let me talk a little bit about what we're gonna do in the time we have. So I'd like to start by taking kind of an honest look at the world right now and how it's affecting many people in a very challenging ways. And it's a little bit scary actually to look at that situation, but I think it's important that we do that. And then I'd like to spend some time introducing to you a strategy for coping with, I think, some of the psychological and emotional and spiritual implications of what's going on in the world and in our country, in the US right now. I'm also going to read you some poetry during our time together and tell you some stories and anecdotes. And I would like to invite you during the course of my talk, we're going to do a little research project, and I'd like to invite you to engage in a research project, the study of which will be your own life. So you'll just have a couple of minutes to reflect on some questions as they relate to your own personal life. And then I want to be able to just kind of open things up for discussion. I think once we kind of have some of the groundwork done in terms of how this material works and what it's about and what our situation is, I think we could potentially have a very fruitful discussion about this from a spiritual and a psychological standpoint, right? So that's kind of the plan anyway. We'll see whether things go according to plan or not. I just browsed the news a couple of days ago, right? And I pulled out some of the headlines which you're looking at right now. And you can probably see them, but they include things like somebody in the New York Times who's prepping for the end of democracy, wildfires rage, COVID spreads in California, New York City has a 166% increase in shootings, protests shouldn't end with people being blinded, and corona cases are rising fastest in these 5 states. Those were some of the more optimistic headlines in the news listing on my computer that day. Obviously, it's a very sad thing when we see that the news is just almost completely full of headlines that are sad and also depressing. To basically read what's some of the things that are going on in our country and in the world right now. And I think that what I want to do in terms of these next 3 slides is to look at what I consider to be the three primary elements in the world at this point that are really pushing us to a spiritual and the psychological edge of the cliff. So the first is our perception that the world is in trouble. That it's not just in trouble, it's in worse trouble than perhaps it's ever been before. And so we have, of course, this pandemic that's going on. We haven't really seen anything quite like it since 1918, which probably means that most of us who are here have never seen anything like it. There's intense political conflict going on in the US right now and some other places in the world. Global warming is threatening the planet as a whole. We have social unrest. And so what is our response to that? How does that leave us psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally? Well, it often, for many of us, leaves us with moments of despair, a sense of helplessness, and a feeling of depression. The second element is the issue of the seeing the threats in the world right now that really put our lives and our way of life in jeopardy. And of course, the virus is right on the top of the list once again. And that's already changed our whole lifestyle, no matter where you live in the US and in many parts of the world. The lockdowns and wearing masks and the social distancing, our entire way of life has really been affected by that. But also again, the political opponents and the conflict and tension in terms of politics right now. The prospect of an economic recession, unemployment is already very high. The climate change, which has already started to affect us in terms of storms and changes in our seasons and the intensity of certain storms. And then other countries, situations like Russia, once again being poised to influence or possibly manipulate our elections. And so again, the outcome of those circumstances leaves us with anxiety, with fear, with confusion about what to do in this situation, with a lot of uncertainty as to how things are going to unfold in our own personal lives based on what's going on. And for many of us, the inability to plan, it's very difficult. You know, I was thinking about the last 6 months of my life, and I realized how much of my energy on a weekly basis goes to planning travel and trips and presentations and trainings in other countries. And I've done none of that, which in one sense has actually been kind of nice because I don't particularly enjoy kind of trying to look for flights, but I can't really plan anything. And most of you are probably in the same situation. We don't really know when things will be in a place where we can actually have any sense of what's going to be going on even a few weeks from now. Okay, just a second here. The third element is the experience of disconnection and isolation. So the way we've been living recently, we have this lack of intimacy, right? We can't sometimes even hug family members who aren't living with us. We can't shake hands with our friends. We can't even come within 6 feet of people in terms of maintaining social distance. There's so much remote working now, people working from their home, remote learning as the schools are opening up with students studying through computer screens. The absence of a lot of our social activity that was going on prior to this pandemic. So that we have more of a bubble kind of way of life, right? We spend a lot more time at home, a lot more time in our room, a lot more time in front of a computer, and much less time engaging with the world, whether it be other people or sometimes even nature. And so that results in a sense of loneliness, a feeling that there's a lack of support for our lives, a lack of human comfort that we can give to others who are suffering, and a lack of human comfort that we can receive when we're struggling or suffering, and a sense of the loss of community. So if we kind of put this all together, we can see where what are the implications of psychologically, spiritually, emotionally of what's going on in the world right now, right? Anxiety, fear, depression, loneliness, despair, confusion, uncertainty, a sense that we have a lack of control over our life and what's going on. So it's not a very pretty picture, right? And you know, I try to keep up with what's going on in the world of mental health, both in the US and globally. And I've never really seen so many studies and articles that talk about the dramatic increase in mental health problems, that the calls to the US disaster distress helpline increased by 335% the last 6 months over the previous period last year. And they did a survey of adults in the US and found that 50% of adults have exhibited signs of depression during this period of time. Time magazine did an article saying that depression is skyrocketing in the US. And this is really worrisome for me because my children personally, that the incredibly high number of young people ages 18 to 29 have thought of or contemplated suicide during this period of time. So, so we're really kind of experiencing a mental health crisis, and possibly we could even think of it as a spiritual crisis as well. And of course, spiritually, one of the consequences of what's happening is that in almost all cases, we can't even get together with our congregations or our sanghas, right? Because of the distancing. So everything has to be done online. So the place that we would often retreat to in terms of finding guidance and comfort spiritually, we can get that through a Zoom conversation, but we can't get it through a human contact. And I think that's a real problem right now. So what can we do? What can we do? So I want to start answering that question first by introducing two concepts from Buddhism and Japanese psychology, which many of you may be already familiar with. And the first concept is Jiriki, which means something like self-power, right? And normally when we're faced with problems, we basically respond naturally by trying to fix the problem, right? So if I have a flat tire, my response is to change the tire. And if the light bulb in my lamp goes out, then I fix the problem by changing the light bulb, putting in a nice new fresh light bulb. And this works fine in many situations. And the more problems that we solve, the more we have a sense of self-reliance and the sense of competence, and our confidence in ourselves grows, right, from being able to do that kind of problem solving. And when circumstances in our lives create difficulty or problems or challenges for us, again, our natural response is to try to change our circumstances. So if it gets quite cold, which it does in Vermont in the winter, you know, we turn up the heat, or here we actually have a wood stove, so we make a fire in the wood stove to help create a little bit more heat in the house. I know it's very hot in California today, so if you have air conditioning, you turn on your air conditioning, right? And you can change the circumstances just by a flick of a switch if you've got air conditioning. If the grass gets too long, you mow the lawn. So, so these kinds of approaches, this problem-solving, circumstance changing approach, can be viewed as Jiriki. And we see Jiriki a lot in psychology and in the self-help movement. In fact, Morita therapy, which is the kind of the other method of psychotherapy that I teach, is often called the psychology of action. And there's a lot in it about essentially taking responsibility for our behavior and taking responsibility for doing things that we need to do in our life. In the self-help movement, we see a message of kind of nobody can really change your life. If you need to change your life, you have to do it yourself. So that's all an example of Jiriki. And Jiriki, I think, works okay as far as it goes. The problem is that it doesn't actually carry us through life. So let's look at situations that come up where we have problems that we can't fix and circumstances that we can't change. And what are some examples of this? Well, a terminal illness, the death of a loved one, the behavior or choices of teenage daughters and sons. Some of you may have that experience. Insomnia is usually something that we can't change through effort or jiriki. A natural disaster, wildfires, right? Our home burning, or even our intimate partner leaving us. These are things where we find that we can't fix the problem and we can't change the circumstances, right? We don't have the ability to do that. So there's lots of examples of that, I think, in our life that we are faced with from time to time. And they cause us great suffering and great agitation because we can't get the outcomes to become, to go according to our desires, right? We want things to be a certain way and they're not that way. And no matter how much effort and how hard we work, we can't get them to be that way. So we can't get things to bend to our own will. And this is the point, this is the kind of situation where we have to look for another way, another path. So we begin to explore a path called Tariki, right, or other power. So if we look at the psychological and spiritual implications of what we're being presented with from our circumstances, from the conditions of the world and our lives right now, this is just a collection of some of the things I had on the earlier slides, right? The disconnection, loneliness, despair, a lack of control, a sense of isolation. And so now we have to look for coping strategies because we can't actually fix the problems that are going on and we can't actually change the circumstances. And when I say we, what I really mean is me or you. In other words, I'm not capable of coming up with a vaccine for the coronavirus, right? And I expect most, if not all of you, aren't capable of that. So I can't do that, right? I can't enter into negotiations with Russia and get peace treaties with the United States or agreements in which they won't interfere with our country. I can't control the stock market or the economy. So all of these things, because I can't control them, I have to find strategies for coping with the way things are at this moment. And strategies that hopefully give me some hope and some faith that things will unfold and get to a different place. So these coping strategies, which are in the arena of Tariki, are things like self-reflection, mindfulness, faith. In Jodo Shinshu, we use the term Shinjin, right? The idea of a true entrusting or a trust in something, some power beyond us, the concept of grace, the cultivation of gratitude, and finally acceptance. In Morita therapy, we actually have a term, a Japanese term called arugamama, which means to accept things as they are. So these are the kind of strategies that we have to use that are centered on Tariki, because in these cases, so many of the things that we're faced with, we can't do anything to basically fix those things from a standpoint of Jiriki. So this leads me to kind of the theme of our talk today, which is something called Naikan. And I expect that a number of you are familiar with Naikan at least some level. Maybe you've read about it, or you've heard me talk about it before, or one of the ministers at a temple. And the term Naikan actually means something like looking from the inside or inside looking. But I like the kind of poetic translation, seeing oneself with the mind's eye. So Naikan is a method, it's a kind of systematic method of self-reflection that I've been using personally for the past 32 years, which, as it turns out, is exactly half my life at this point. So half a life ago was the time that I was introduced to Naikan in Japan. And I'm consistently surprised after all these years that I can still discover things about myself and about my life that are new to me, even after all these years of doing this kind of self-reflection. So I have some optimism that Naikan self-reflection can help us to better cope with the stressful situations that we're facing, that it can help us deal more successfully with family relationships under these conditions, that it can reveal support and care and love that we're receiving even when we're lonely and feel disconnected, that it can help us nourish our faith in a power beyond ourself, and it can help us cultivate an authentic sense of gratitude and finally deepen our spiritual life, regardless of what tradition we align with. You know, that even though the roots of Naikan are in Buddhism, the people who have come and done retreats here, or who I've shared Naikan with or trained, come from all different religious traditions. And I've never found anyone who really couldn't see Naikan as simply a vehicle for deepening their own understanding of that tradition in their own personal life. So I'm going to tell you a little story at this point as a way of kind of introducing Naikan, and it's a story I've written about before, so you may have heard it. But it's about a hike that I took back in the late 1980s with my dog at the time. His name was Rocky, and I lived in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. So I was about 2 hours away from the Shenandoah Valley and the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I used to go out there regularly. And in the spring, I was looking forward to doing this particular hike, which had to do with climbing up an area in the Blue Ridge Mountains where I would get to a nice kind of beautiful promontory. I understood from reading about it, and I'd be able to see, you know, a great distance to the west in West Virginia and back into the east in Virginia. So I was really looking forward to this hike, and this weekend came when the weather was good. So I got up early, packed up my hiking gear. I took my dog, and we headed out to the trail. And we parked at the parking area, and I started hiking up the trail. And I quickly found something like this, which was a big tree that had fallen over the trail and blocked the trail. So I basically just had to figure out a way to kind of climb over it or around it. And so I continued my hike, but very soon I found another situation where a branch or a large tree had fallen over the trail. My dog was having a much easier time dealing with this than I was, physically anyway, but I was much younger those days, so I kind of got around that. And this kept going on to the point where I started noticing that my mind and my attitude was changing. I was starting to get kind of perturbed and a little agitated, and I started having thoughts like, you know, where's the Forest Service? I pay tax dollars so that we can have people to take care of trails like this. They should be out here with their chainsaw, and they should be, you know, cutting up these trees and branches. And I continued to run into situations like this. A lot of these situations where the trail was blocked. So by the time I actually got to the top, I had my lunch with me, and I'm sitting on this beautiful rock, and certainly there were these beautiful views, just as I had hoped. It was a lovely day, the sun was out, and my mind was so agitated by the experience I had hiking up that trail that I couldn't really enjoy my experience once I got to the top, because I just was very frustrated and agitated about the actual experience hiking up and all of the obstacles that were in my way that I had to deal with. But as I started eating my lunch and sitting there and thinking about this, I had this vague recollection that on the way up, there may have been a couple of situations where someone had cleared or moved one of these trees or a big branch from the trail. And when they do that, of course, they usually cut them with a chainsaw, and then they'll just, or just lift them, and then they'll put them on the side, right? So the branch or the tree trunk is like parallel with the trail, but it's not blocking it anymore. And I had some vague recollection that maybe there was a couple of instances like that. So I decided to do some research. And on the way down, I decided I was going to keep track of two numbers. One was the number of obstacles that I had faced, which I remembered from climbing up, trees and branches in the way. But I was also going to keep track of the number of occasions where someone had moved or cut a tree or a branch and moved it to the side of the trail so that I didn't have to climb over it. So I started keeping track of those numbers. And after a period of time, I stopped and realized that I had gone quite a ways and was almost back at the car. But here's what the numbers were. I had counted 47 instances where actually the trees or branches had been moved from the trail, and only 42 where they were basically in my way. So the reality of that hike on the way up was that more had been done to make it possible for me to easily hike up the trail than the obstacles that I faced. But my experience was almost completely immersed in all the obstacles that I had to get around and how frustrating that was. So it was really my first kind of lesson, Nikon kind of lesson, in the sense that I realized that that my experience and that our experience is really not based on our life situation. It's based on what we pay attention to, right? So my life situation was that all of these trees and branches had been moved, but my attention was on one after another, just the ones that were obstacles on the hike. And I think for many of us, our lives are kind of like this, right? We pay attention to problems and difficulties in our life because we have to, because in many cases we may have to do something about them or respond to them in some way. But when, you know, my wife makes me a cup of tea before my seminar, or I've got lighting in here, or Koichi, who I can't even see right now, is handling all the admin possibilities, and there's this whole network from Zoom that's linking us all in from all over the world. But I'm not thinking about that or noticing that because I'm caught up in some problem or difficulty. And so what Nikon is going to offer us is not positive thinking or optimism. It's going to offer us a reality-based way of not denying that we have problems, but bringing into our realistic perception the ways that we are cared for and supported by the world every day, from the moment that we wake up in our bed, and even while we're sleeping, actually, until we go to bed and go to sleep that night. We're supported and cared for. So by doing that, it's not meant to make us happy or feel good about the problems and difficulties we're facing, but it helps us basically look at reality as it is. When I showed you that slide with all the news headlines, right? That's not the reality of the world. That's a little segment of the reality of the world. But we would have to add to that segment the fact that somebody went in for eye surgery and just got their eyesight restored yesterday. We just don't see that in the news, right? But it's really part of the world's reality. And the fact that the sun is out today, or that one of my cosmos flowers on our deck actually bloomed a couple of days ago and has a beautiful blossom. This is also part of the world's reality. So I think that as we go through this process of Nikon and investigating our lives, we try to pay attention not just to the problems and difficulties, but to the bigger picture of everything else that's going on to care for and support us. So this is where I'm going to ask you to conduct a research project in which you're going to study your own life. And we're going to actually do this on Zoom. I'm not sure I've actually ever done this on Zoom, so this will be a great experiment. And the research project is you're going to use these 3 questions from Nikon. And with each question, we're going to take 2 minutes of silence. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on that question as your life has been over the past 24 hours. And then when we come back together, I'll see, you can, if you want to, I'll see if anybody wants to share just a couple of things that came up for them from their reflections, but you don't have to. And you can write down your reflections, or you can just close your eyes and kind of do this in a kind of meditative way, whichever suits you at the time. And we'll just kind of see what we come up with. You know, one of the changes I've made in teaching this material and doing it personally is I no longer see Nikon as a method where we're trying to get to a particular outcome. I just see it as investigation, and a real investigation, a real research project, you just open yourself to any outcome. So we never really know how our life is going to turn out when we reflect on it. And so it's always kind of a fresh experience to do this kind of research, no matter how many times you've done it. All right. So you're going to study your life, and the other thing I want to mention in doing that is that if you continue to do this, one of the things that will probably come up is that you'll begin to question your story. And most of us have a story that has become part of the way that we look at our life and particularly our past. For me, my story for many years, for the first half of my life, was about family violence, that I looked at my childhood as one in which there was a lot of family violence and significant violence in the situation where the police were called, or someone had to go to the doctors or to a hospital with a black eye or something like that. And that was my story. And when I met someone like a woman I was dating, if we got to know each other and we were actually sharing some personal information, you know, I might share my story. And the more I shared my story, the more I got very invested in that story. But in those 2 weeks I spent in Japan, when I was really reflecting on my life, what I found is that that experience actually shattered my story, because I had to question it. And I found that it was not that those things didn't happen, because they did, but it was only a small piece of the picture of my life that I was basically focusing on. So there's historically a man named Aryudeva, who was one of the top students of the Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna. And he has this quote: "To question whether things are as they are can shake the very foundation of habitual clinging." Just the power of questioning whether things really are the way they are can shake the very foundation of habitual clinging. So before we do this research, I'm going to just introduce you to a quote from the Monshu Koshin Otani. This is from one of his books. "If you never question what you are doing, the process of spiritual rebirth cannot begin. This also goes for self-reflection and inner development, as well as cultivating a true sense of contentment. The most frightening proposition is that a person can somehow lose the ability or heart to reflect upon himself." And it's that last line that really stopped me when I was reading, and made me go back and read that line again. The most frightening proposition is that a person can somehow lose the ability or heart to reflect upon himself. That means that if that's the most frightening proposition, it means that there isn't anything more frightening than losing the ability to reflect upon oneself. And some of you who are more in my age group may remember a book by M. Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled. And I heard M. Scott Peck interviewed in an interview years ago. And he's a very devout Christian. He was talking about the concept of good and evil. And they asked him, they said, "Well, how would you define evil?" And he said, "I define evil as the inability to put oneself in another person's shoes." The inability to put oneself in another person's shoes was his definition of evil. So there's, I think, a lot of similarity between that kind of definition and this idea that it would be frightening for us to lose the ability to reflect upon ourselves. So let's start with the first question: what have I received from others? And I'm going to give you just, when I start, I'm going to give you just 2 minutes to reflect on the question. So you're going to be looking at a time period of the last 24 hours of your life, right? So you can think back to when that was 24 hours ago, and everything that took place from that time till this moment is the period that you're examining, just this one day out of your life, right? And you're going to look at, what did I receive from others during that 24-hour period? If you're writing, you can make as long a list as possible. And if you're doing this just in your mind or in your mind heart, you can just hold that there during the 2 minutes. And I want you to look for very practical things. So it could be that my wife made coffee this morning, and she made me some tea, and my daughter stopped by to say hello before she went hiking with her boyfriend. And I have these eyeglasses that I'm wearing that help me see more clearly. And I got to feed the birds and enjoy the birds this morning, which was really lovely. And last night I had we had a chilly night last night, so I had a blanket to keep me warm. So these are really practical, concrete things that you received, right? It could also be things like beauty. You could have seen a beautiful sunset, or maybe there was a lovely breeze that came, or maybe you went to a museum and you saw a beautiful piece of artwork. But it's things that are very practical in your life. So if you think of yourself as thinking, oh, well, my wife was very supportive, or my husband was very supportive, you have to move that down to reality. Like what did he do that was supportive, right? Or if you think this person was very helpful, what did they do that was helpful? So you're trying to come up with these kind of concrete things. So I'm going to keep track of the time on my watch here, and we'll take 2 minutes, and then I'll ring a little bell and we'll get back together. All right, and when we do that, I'm going to unshare my screen, and then we'll kind of be able to see, at least I'll be able to see people again. All right, so let's start right now. Okay, so that's about 2 minutes roughly, and so we'll take a few minutes and just see if anybody wants to share some examples. I'll start by just giving you, I mentioned a couple of things, but I remembered that actually yesterday we were celebrating something related to my wife, and so on the way home we go past this little little place called Cookie Love, and it's this place that makes these delicious cookies and ice cream. And so I got myself a cookie. Every one of their different cookies ends in the word love. So they have enduring love and forbidden love and original love. And I got a forbidden love cookie, which is a mocha chocolate chip cookie, which was really delicious. So that was one of the things I received yesterday. I received the use of a bike to take a really great bike ride, get some exercise yesterday. And what else? And I received some dinner last night that my wife made, including a really delicious, healthy salad. So those are just some examples of things that I've received in the past 24 hours. So Koichi, maybe you can kind of help facilitate this. So if you want to just share 2 or 3 things from your list that you can share, just go ahead and raise your hand, and maybe Koichi can look for you, or you can maybe, I think there's a way to do that.
They can go ahead and unmute their mics. It usually works out okay. Go ahead and unmute
Okay.
the mic and speak out. I see.
All right, so
Michael with his hand up.
And my neighbor, who is a black policeman, mowed my lawn for me.
okay. So your Ginny said that her neighbor mowed her lawn for her. That was nice of him.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah. You know, I've been doing this for a while now that I have all this time on my hands. I'm reading the PWS, the sutras, and listening to Sugihara Sensei doing the letters of Renyo and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me not upon myself, but to think upon others. And so like every day, well, not every day, but Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, Ready Wheels picks me up and takes me to dialysis. And I find myself always thanking the driver, thanking them for taking me, thanking them for risking their lives to take me to dialysis. And then when I'm at dialysis, I find myself always thanking the nurses and the technicians who are giving me my treatment, you know, to stay alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, you know, Nikon is part of this, but I just noticed that ever since I've been really diving into the Dharma, it's really showed me not to look at myself, but look at others and see what others are doing.
Yeah, so I think it's great, Michael, that you're noticing those things. And one of the things that you're describing is that by noticing those things, you're then able to express your thanks for those things, right? So if we don't notice what other people are doing for us, then we can't express our gratitude for it. And I think that's a really important point. that we have to start by being aware. We start with our awareness, and then that awareness can lead to us being able to actually express our gratitude to others. But the things you mentioned in terms of getting a ride to dialysis and the people at the center who are helping you, those are great examples of some of the things that you received. So thank you very much, Michael. And,
I see a hand up from Michael Jones.
Mhm.
Michael
Hi, thank you, Koichi. So what I was interested in is 24 hours seems like an incredibly short period of time to look at. But in that period of time, I came up with the things that I've received are the love of my wife, the love of my granddaughter via Zoom, a memory from my niece who talked about when she was small, we used to take her with us on family vacations. And so when she became sort of our fourth child, and she was now doing the same thing for another family, and he is now their fourth child, and that memory was pleasant with her. I got a breakfast item from a friend this morning, and I got a really nice letter of introduction from Reverend Sugihara in Portland as I start the next semester of our JSCC online training. So 24 hours yielded a lot of things to notice.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Thank you very much for those examples. And somebody else? Sumi has her hand up.
Yes, well, I was hospitalized in June and I had to learn how to re-walk again. Still very unsteady, but my neighbor knows this. And so every morning he puts my morning newspaper right next to my door so I don't have to walk very far. And he does this every morning, 7 days. And he also puts away my garbage cans for me. And then I had an appointment with my dentist because when I fell on my face and I chipped a tooth and I lost a.
Oh, man.
And the assistant said, oh, this is time for me to give you x-ray. But she took 16 x-rays and my face, although it's been healed quite a bit, I still have a lot of pain on my right side. So when she was putting those little cardboards to take the x-rays of my teeth, she was pressing against my face and that was giving me a lot of pain. And she saw this pain in my face and she says, you know, every time I put in that cardboard, she says, just take a deep, long breath. A simple little thing that she told me to do really did help reduce the pain. And then, of course, after I got home, I noticed on my dining room table a big package of toilet paper because my daughter had gone to Costco and she knew that I was getting close to being out of toilet paper. And so she was kind enough to do that and drop it by when I was at the dentist's office. And then that night, I was going to go out to, when it cooled down, to walk around the block. And I was able to do that because I have now walkers to help me walk outside. And one of them is from Michael Jones' mother-in-law who passed away, had a walker. And now I had a walker that I had ordered from Kaiser. And so, but the walkers have been really wonderful to help me get around. Otherwise, I would really be stuck at home. I'm very, very grateful. In 24 hours.
Yeah, thank you, Sumi. And you know, in your example, and also in Michael's example, you know, we're hearing examples from people who are in situations where there's been an accident or an illness or a disease, and you know, those are the situations where we very easily become so connected to our pain or our the limitations that this accident has placed on us or the problems that it's caused. And it's very hard for us to actually make that shift of attention if we don't do it very consciously to looking at how people are supporting us in the aftermath of that accident or during the recovery from that disease. And in one of my books, I actually share the story of a woman who did Naikan, and she did Naikan during her retreat on an incident in which she fell onto the tracks on the Long Island Railroad and was hit by a train while she was pregnant. And she actually did these 3 questions. And one of the questions is, what did I receive? Now, of course, the question isn't, what did I receive? I got hit by a train. The question is, in the process of saving her life and recovering, what did she receive? And she had a huge list of everything, you know, from the ambulance drivers to the doctors and the people who reconstructed her face with plastic surgery, and her mother-in-law, and it just went on in terms of what people had been doing for her. And when we make that shift of attention through this question of what have I received, even when we're really suffering or really having difficulty, it opens up our eyes to the way that the world is basically trying to help us with our pain and suffering in the aftermath of it. So it can really be very enlightening experience to do this when you're struggling with an illness or a disease. So I want to take one more example from someone, if there's someone else who wants to share, and then we're going to go on to the second question. So anyone else give us like 2 or 3 items?
I have a hand up from Ginny Parkham. So
Okay.
I didn't know if she was still with us. Ginny?
Yeah, so let's do Ginny,
Yes,
a couple of things, and then
was
Ginny.
asked, I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yesterday, my neighbor spontaneously mowed my lawn for me, which was wonderful. And it was also neat because he's a Black and African-American policeman, and that so was meaningful, especially in all the stuff that we're going through now, that he did that. It was just so neat. And also last night I was having an anxiety attack, which happens. And one cat stayed in bed with me. I'm just so grateful to her for doing that, because when I'm that way, they might as well run and hide under the bed. But it made me feel really good, and I was really grateful to her. And I have a nightly practice of at the altar doing my night liturgy. I have always say 10 things for which I'm grateful that have happened during the day. And this, I guess, ties in with that, although I've been doing that for years and years. But this sounds like a nice tie-in. Thank you.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much, Ginny. So, you know, we begin to realize that that we exist thanks to the grace or the kindness of all these people, both in the present and in the past, right? If you live in a house or even an apartment, you know, you think about someone had to build these walls and put on this roof so I'm not getting wet from rain, and so we begin to see how dependent we are on other people and forces of energy and objects in the world. The important thing about Naikan is that by asking this question, we see the kind of building blocks of being able to come to that conclusion. But to just jump to the conclusion and say, yeah, I realize, you know, my life is just supported by everybody and everything, so I don't really need to do this. But my experience is that if we don't actually look at the specifics, then we're just really working on an intellectual basis. But when we actually begin to go through the specifics of what these people did for us and how we were supported by them, then it really, I think, goes from just being intellectual to being something that we really experience in our heart. So, so having said that, I want to move on with the next question. There's actually a couple things I want to share with you before we get to that question. So I'm going to go back and see if I can do my screen sharing here. And this is a poem by Saichi. Some of you know of him. He's one of the Myokonin in the Pure Land tradition. And I thought this was an interesting poem when I came across it, because it's almost as if Saichi, and maybe some of the ministers could give me a closer date, but I think he's maybe back in what, the 12th or 14th century or something like that, but that he almost was kind of doing Naikan through this poem. He says, "How grateful. When I think of it, all is by Amida's grace. Oh, Saichi, what do you mean by it? Oh yes, his grace is a real fact. This Saichi was made by grace. the dress I wear, the food I eat, the footgear I put on, every other thing we have in this world is made by Amita's compassion, including the bowl and chopsticks, even the workshop where I work making wooden clogs. So that sounds a lot to me like someone who has just been doing some Naikan reflection on the first question. And I think one of the interesting things about it is that he makes reference to all is by Amita's grace, and then later that everything that I have in the world is made by Amita's compassion. But of course, the food he eats isn't really made by Amita's compassion. It's made by someone who planted the food, farmers, and who cook the food. And his clothes are really not made by Amita's compassion. They're made by the people who grew the textiles like cotton, and the people who turned those into actual fabric, and the people who sewed them into a shirt or pants or socks. So the only way we could really understand that is to think that all of those people are simply a manifestation of Amita's compassion, which I think is what he means when he says that. And this is a quote from Brother David Steindl-Rast. He's a Benedictine monk, and he's probably done more work in the spiritual arena of gratitude than anybody I know of. He's, I think, in his late 90s now, but I think he's still around. He has some wonderful material out in books and on his website. And he says, "But really, what on earth does the world owe you when it comes down to it? Absolutely nothing. Everything is given to you. Even the fact that you are here is a gift. You didn't bring yourself here. You didn't buy this life. How did you get here? It's all a gift." And then the last thing I want to share with you is a little story from my first book on Naikan. And I'm going to actually read this rather than just tell it, if you don't mind. This is a story called Unwrapping Life's Gifts. I had dinner with Kathy in New York recently. Kathy is an attractive woman in her late 50s whom I've known for many years. During the course of our dinner, Kathy proceeded to report on each of the key people in her life and describe how they were not meeting her needs and expectations. One of her good friends had failed to invite her to dinner, even though some other mutual friends had been invited. Her daughter and son-in-law did not allow her to spend enough time with her newborn grandchild. Her business partner was not attending to his work properly, and her husband had lost interest in making love to her. And her son hadn't even sent her a birthday card. There were others who fell short of her expectations, and as she reported her stories, I could see just how much she was suffering. Just talking about all the people in her life this way resulted in an experience of suffering. I doubt that she even noticed what she was eating and who was serving it. Now, Kathy has an idea of what the ideal friend would do, say, feel, think, and give. She has a similar image of the ideal son, daughter, husband, colleague, waiter, grocery clerk, and auto repair person. Each day she searches for the image of her ideal, and each day she experiences reality. And each day she focuses her attention on how reality fails to meet her image of the ideal. So she's discovered and mastered a recipe for depression and disappointment, a formula for suffering. Over the years, she's trained her mind to focus on the gap between her ideal of the world and her reality, and her mind has graduated with honors. It operates this way with less effort than it takes Kathy to brush her teeth. So Kathy suffers as each day brings her more disillusionment. And with every story, she reaches out for sympathy, but the sympathy others offer her pales in comparison with the sympathy she wants. How often have our minds played the same game? How often have we sunk into disappointment and resentment because others fall short of our ideals? We occupy a moment in time and a few cubic feet in space in a universe that is both timeless and without boundaries. And yet we believe the universe should conform to our ideals. Can we be so arrogant as to think that such a cosmic speck is capable of knowing what is truly ideal? As long as we hold fast to our ideal of what we deserve from the world, we blind ourselves to the gifts that we are receiving. We look back on our childhood and we notice what could have been done for us and given to us that we think would have made us happier. The gap between our reality and our ideal of what it should have been like attracts our attention like a magnet. But to focus on this gap is to miss most of reality. We miss the countless moments when we were perfectly cared for and attended to. We trade the reality of how we were loved for the illusion that we should have been loved more and better. It's an unworthy exchange that leads us to spiritual and emotional bankruptcy. When I narrow my vision and search for an ideal that my mind has created, life seldom complies. But when I broaden my vision and simply notice what life is offering, I find that I'm surrounded by an abundance of care and support. Yet we can repeatedly observe the mechanics of a mind that's rarely satisfied with what it has at the moment, because it's always yearning for some manufactured ideal. We can witness eyes that scan reality for what they want, failing to see what they're being offered. Such awareness is the first step in retraining ourselves to truly open to the gifts that the universe is offering us. Have you ever seen a young child who has a single rigid idea of what he wants for Christmas? On Christmas morning, he rapidly unwraps all of his gifts, looking for the single gift that his mind has targeted. And in the absence of this gift, he sulks and cries and pouts and walks away from the Christmas tree in disappointment. In his wake, he leaves all of his presents abandoned and unappreciated. How often does this pouting, spoiled child surface in our own daily encounters with life? How many gifts have we left lying under the Christmas trees of our past? How many presents remain unwrapped because we failed to even notice their presence? Take a moment, Kathy, to reclaim your gifts and abandon your ideal images. You have it backwards. Open your eyes and see how many gifts there are to unwrap. Notice the presence of your presence. It's not your life that is disappointing. It's your mind. So my thanks to Kathy actually for giving me that story, and she was a real person and teaching me a little bit about that. So let's go on to the second question, Naikan. There's 3 questions, right? We've done the first one. And this question is, what have I given to others? So again, we want to look at the same period of time. It's a 24-hour period. And we're just going to look at what did I give or do for others. So some examples as I think back about my day is I met Linda at this lovely state park on the shores of Lake Champlain, and I set up the chairs so that when she got there later, they were all set up and waiting for her. And I poured her a glass of wine, and I bought her some kind of little ice cream treat at the Cookie Love store on the way home. And I set up the TV to watch a few minutes of a movie that we had started a few nights before. So those are some of the examples of things that I gave to my wife, but I can think about other things I gave to other people yesterday. And that would be kind of the reflection I would do on this question, what have I given to others? So again, very practical, concrete things, not like, oh, I was supportive or I was really helpful, but what did you do to be helpful? How were you supportive? And we're just going to do the same 2-minute experience, right? So I'm going to have a start, and then in 2 minutes, I'll ring the bell and we can see what we came up with. All right? So let's go ahead and begin now. Okay, so that's about 2 minutes. I'm going to end my screen share. Be willing to share 1 or 2 items for your reflection on what you gave or did for others yesterday. Okay, Jane, I see your hand is up. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself first?
Yesterday, I made my husband's favorite meal, stew, which he loves. I sent a get well card to a friend who's in a nursing home. And the UPS driver came and rang the doorbell yesterday. So I opened it and kind of followed her out, and I thanked her, for actually coming and delivering the house. And I sent a email greeting this morning to a neighbor who lives alone.
Great. Great. Thank you very much, Jane. That's great. Somebody else have a couple of items from their reflection on what they gave yesterday? Okay, Bill Ames.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I made my husband's oatmeal for breakfast, and I put away the laundry for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Great. Thank you very much. I assume your name is not Bill.
My name is Diane.
Diane,
My
okay.
husband's name is Bill.
Okay, I see on the screen I'm seeing Bill. So thank you, Diane. Okay, and someone else have an item or two of something they gave yesterday?
Okay, I think there is something that I did yesterday which I was trying to be thoughtful about. So I have a card table with things spread out on it to sort. And I put a chair in front of the cardboard. And then after I did that, I noticed that it was in the pathway of going from one room to the other. And we have a 1-year-old that is toddling around, and it would have made it difficult for him to maneuver there. So I moved the chair to the other side, making room in another direction so that he could have the pathway cleared. And so I think that sometimes we do things for others, not with the intention that they would notice or even think about it. And that's what I gave yesterday.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. And somebody else?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment.
Okay, Tabinda?
Okay, there are two things. First one is that I only served dinner to my family, and that was the only thing that I pretty much did in last few hours. And other than that, I just realized that the first question that you asked, I had a long list of things that other people had done for me. And now for the right after that, you asked me the second question, and I realized that I don't have a lot to do, offer to other people probably, or probably I did not do that. So I just realized that difference, the stark difference between the two lists. So that's, what I wanted to mention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I do workshops over the past 25 years, I always do this little survey. I won't be able to see everybody's hands, but I'll just go ahead and take a moment to do it since Tabinda mentioned this point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 possibilities as you look at your first list and your second list, right? If you did this in your mind, you won't have it in writing, but you can just kind of reflect on what you came up with. And so we're going to look at the kind of list of things you received in the first question and the list of things you gave in the second question. And I'm going to ask you to vote for one of those things based on your reflection. And so that one possibility is that during this 24-hour period, we're not talking about the rest of your life, just this 24 hours, that you received more than you gave, right? One possibility is you received more than you gave. Another possibility is that you gave more than you received, right? And the third possibility is that it's exactly equal, right? And so you're not just looking at the quantity of items on each list, but you're also looking at kind of the quality or value that you can just pretty much arbitrarily assign to those things, So maybe you only gave one thing, but that was that you jumped into a cold lake and you saved a little 4-year-old girl from drowning, right? But that's the only thing you gave. So you might give yourself more points, than if the one thing you gave was that you picked up a piece of trash on the road. So you have to make your own judgment about that. There's no formula for it. But I'm going to ask you to vote for one of these 3 things, all right? So option number 1, raise your hand as you look at this and try to answer honestly, right? We're not looking for any particular answer. Option number 1 is how many of you believe that you received more than you gave yesterday in the last 24 hours? Raise your hand. Okay. And then option number 2, how many believe that as you look at your reflections that you actually gave more than you received in the last 24 hours? Okay. And then option number 3, how many of you would say that when you look at them side by side, they're really exactly equal? Raise your hand. Okay. So on my screen, I see one person at that. So so that, and you know, there's, again, however that comes out for you is fine. And it may well be that there are people who did actually give a lot more than they received, and that's wonderful. For me, as I look at my reflection on the past 24 hours, I received a lot more than I gave from others. So to Binda's point about kind of the length of your list, also I find that if I take more than 2 minutes, often if I'm doing this daily Naikan reflection, I might take, you know, 25 or 30 minutes for all 3 questions, so about 10 minutes each. It gets harder for me to come up with things that I gave, whereas the things I received, I almost can kind of keep going. But in 2 minutes, you probably won't notice that as clearly. And so before I move on, I also want to acknowledge that one of my colleagues is here, Saori Miyazaki, who lives in Northern California, and she trained with us, and she's certified in Japanese psychology. And Saori, can you remind me, where did you do your Naikan retreat? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes. The Naikan retreat I did at Yamato Naikan Center.
Okay.
In Nara, Tokyo. Nara, Japan.
Yes. Okay, good. And where in California are you located?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. Okay, great. Anyway, it's good to see you. And
good to see you too, Greg.
So I'm trying to get back to my screen here. Here we go. So a couple of things I want to share, and then I want to keep things moving because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. So let me mention a couple of other things here. I think I have to go back to screen share. Okay, I don't think I'm on screen share yet. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you should be able to see a slide with this very beautiful young girl with these lovely lotus flowers, and the question, what have I given to others? But I'm having trouble getting to the next screen here. Let's see what I can do. Ah, there we go. So, so a couple of considerations when, you know, one of the things that I've found about Naikan is the questions themselves are very simple, as you can see. And that's actually great because I've done this with children as young as 4 or 5 years old. You don't have to be educated or even highly intelligent to answer these questions. You do have to be sincere, and you do have to be paying attention to your life more than just the way other people are causing you problems. Otherwise, it's hard to answer the questions. But so one of the considerations as we go through these questions, and we look at the first 2 questions, is, are you being specific? And I think almost everybody's examples that they shared were good examples of very specific things. The second question is, are you being consistent? And here's what I mean by that, is that some people might say that that something that they gave was they gave a compliment to someone else. Maybe you said someone, you noticed that person got their hair cut and you said, oh, your hair looks nice, right? It's a compliment. And if you see that as something you gave, then if anyone gave you a compliment, you would always want to consider that to be also something you received, right? Because that would be, there'd be some consistency. So I always have people look at the list of things that they gave to just see if there's consistency about those kinds of items. And often that's things like compliments or hugs or smiles. Like if you gave someone a hug on your list of things you gave, did you indicate that on your list of things you received, that you received a hug, unless the person didn't hug you back, unless they just stood there, which is unlikely, but possible. And things like attention. Someone will say, well, I gave my attention to the person at dinner who was talking to me about the political situation. And that's fine, but did you also include then situations during the past 24 hours where other people gave you attention, right? So the thing is, Naikan doesn't define at all what it is that is something that can be received or given. It leaves that up to you. So you're responsible, though, for making sure that you have some consistency in how you're treating those items on your two lists, right? And then the last thing I want to mention is this issue of being thorough. So what I mean by that is sometimes what I find is when I have a list of things that I gave, I can look at an item on that list, and you can try this for yourself, and realize that I had to receive something or many things in order to give that. So an example might be, let's say I say, well, I think something I gave yesterday was I washed some of my wife's dishes, okay? But what did I have to receive to wash those dishes? I had to receive hot water and a sink and a dishcloth or a sponge and some dishwashing liquid, right? And those were all things that I received, so they should have been put on my receive column, but as it turns out, I didn't put them on my receive column. So I can now be more thorough by adding those things to things I received. I received the use of a sponge and some hot water to wash dishes with, and dishwashing liquid and a sink. And when I think about yesterday and I think about buying my wife an ice cream at this place, well, in order to do that, what did I have to receive? I had to receive the car that I drove there in. I had to receive the use of a credit card, which was offered to me by Chase Bank, I think. I used that credit card. And the little machine that I put it in to read my credit card. And I had to receive the order, the person who took my order. They had to actually take my order in order to get that ice cream. And then I could go on for probably 15 minutes, all the things that I received in order to purchase a little bowl of ice cream for my wife. So if you really want to challenge yourself to be thorough, you can go through some of those items on question 2 and see if you can add anything to question 1. And we already talked a little bit about the issue of balance, right? Whether you received more than you gave. For me, and I'm not saying this out of any humility, because those of you who know me know that that's not I'm not humble, but I'm saying this factually because I've spent many weeks in my life, starting with my first retreat in Japan, but many other retreats doing this, and I've spent over 30 years doing Naikan in my life, and I can say that I have by far received more than I gave, cumulatively in my whole life, but also every day that I've done Naikan, and on every person that I've done Naikan, I've received more than I gave. And I just say that because it's a fact. And so when I came back from Japan, having done this retreat, one of the views I had of myself before I left was that I'm a somewhat giving person. And if you had asked me before that, why do you think you're a giving person? I could have given examples. You know, I give money to charity, and I volunteered to work in a soup kitchen, and I worked in Appalachia with legal aid, and I had all these things in my history, and I could say that shows how giving of a person I am. But when I looked at the actual details of my life, with every relationship I've ever been in for 16 hours a day for 14 days, and I looked at it, what I found is that I'm much more of a receiving person. I can't really say I'm a giving person. I could say I'm a receiving person, or if you prefer, I'm a taking person. Those are both more accurate descriptions of the nature of my life than to say I'm a giving person. So again, those to me are just the facts that, that I've seen in terms of doing this kind of reflection. Right, so we talked about this. You know, the founder of Naikan was this man, Yoshimoto Ishin, who was a very devout Buddhist. He grew up and his family had a temple not too far from Kyoto. And I did one of my Naikan retreats there. And he was also a very successful businessman. And he said that part of the inspiration for developing Naikan in these questions came from his work as a business person, because at the end of every month, his business made artificial leather for Japanese cars, which of course became very popular in the 60s and 70s. So his business did really well. And, but he would send out a statement every month to all of his customers, and it would say, you know, here's how much product we sent to you in the past month, and here's how much money you sent us, and here's the balance, right? And the balance either means you have a credit, like we owe you product or refund or whatever, or you know, you have a balance that you have to pay, you owe us money. And so one of the ways we can think about these first two questions is kind of as a life reconciliation. So when you get off of the webinar today and you go about your life, and you go back into life, if you are someone who received more in the past 24 hours, that means that since you received more, that means that you have a balance, you have a debt to the world. So you go into the world in debt. And but if you've given more than you've received, then you go into the world and the world owes you, right? And it's a kind of real difference in attitudes, isn't it? You know, whether we go about our lives with the idea of how can I somehow pay back my debt to the world or to the people who are connected with me, or how can I go into the world and basically get as much as I can because the world owes me, right? And we see people who have very different attitudes. Very few who I think have an ongoing attitude of how can I go into the world and try to give back a little bit of what I received because I'm really in debt. We sometimes know people like that, but it's much more common to see people who, not because they're consciously thinking of this, but who seem to live their lives with the idea of how can I get as much as I can for myself. And I think one of the ways that Naikan can affect us is it by making us aware of how much more we've received than we've given. It gives us a realistic picture that we do have a debt to the world, and it is part of our a realistic part of our life to think about how we can pay back the world for what we've received so far in our life. So as we put these first two questions together, there's lots of interesting kind of ways that we can analyze and begin to look at our lives when we've done those two questions. But we have one more question, and I want to take a couple minutes to do that question. Well, the question is, I guess before I do that, I will share one more little poem with you because it's one of my favorites. And then we'll do the third question. And this, do you know what this is on the screen? This is a lanyard. I don't know if any of you knew that, or if you've, I actually made these in camp when I was a kid. So I know what that is, but some people don't recognize or know what a lanyard is. And this poem is entitled The Lanyard. It's by Billy Collins, who was the kind of national poet for the United States for a year or two. So I'm going to read you his poem. The other day, I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid a long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that didn't keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and to swim. And I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Now here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Thank you, Billy Collins. All right, question number 3. This is the most difficult question. We've saved it for last. It's the question, what troubles and difficulties have I caused others? So we're going to look at the past 24 hours. We're going to think of any examples or instances in our lives in this 24-hour period where we caused trouble, difficulty, inconvenience, problems, suffering to other people, to other things, animal objects, forms of energy, any troubles that we caused. And we're going to have 2 minutes to do that. Okay, so I will keep time and see what you can think of from the last 24 hours about troubles or difficulties you caused. So please begin now. Okay, because of the timing of this, I'm not going to have us share some of the troubles we caused, except I'll just share a couple of things from my own reflection, which is I was out on my bike and I was supposed to meet my wife at the state park, and she was bringing a pizza, and I kept her waiting for probably 5 to 10 minutes before I got over there on my bike. So that was a trouble I caused her in terms of waiting for me. And I also caused trouble to my daughter because she was looking for someone to take care of her puppy because she was going to be doing an overnight camping thing with her boyfriend and going down to see his parents. And I told her we couldn't do that because we had plans to do some biking in the afternoon, and we couldn't do that if we were taking care of the dog. So I think I disappointed her. She was hoping we might be able to do that. So those are 2 examples of troubles that I had. This is a quote from Reverend Gyodo Hagori. He says, "It is Shin Buddhism that especially clarifies the basic self-centeredness of man. In fact, it teaches not only that man perpetually creates countless self-centered acts, but that awakening to this truth is essential to his well-being." So, so I do think that one of the distinguishing features of Shin Buddhism is really that the ability to examine our own bono, in this case, the 3rd question, how we've caused suffering, how we've caused trouble, how we've caused problems for others, that the ability to do that is actually an essential element of our own spiritual awakening. And if we don't engage in a process of self-examination that includes looking at that part of our life, then theoretically it becomes impossible for us to become awakened from a spiritual perspective. This is a little haiku that my wife wrote about the 3rd question. "We do not notice the wake we leave behind if we don't look back." And I'm going to read you one more short little poem, and then I think from there, I think we'll just go ahead and open things up for discussion. Let's see if I can find what I'm looking for here. This is, I'll close with this. This is a poem by the Buddhist monk Hosen. It says, "I sit on the tip of an iceberg, my life floating away out of control, unaware of the unfathomable mountain of love that carries me each day until I melt into the ocean." So thank you very much for listening and participating, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can unshare this, and then we can just open things up for some questions and discussion. we'll just open it up for comments, questions, anything that you want to say about what we've been talking about today. Again, just go ahead and you can just try to jump in, and we'll try it that way, because I can only see a small portion of people on the screen. So I see Michael Ishikawa's hand up. So Michael, do you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, as I'm listening to your explanation on Nikon, it sounds very much like Shin Buddhism, you know, the teachings of Shakyamuni, Tonglan, Shandao, Shinran. It talks about this, we're all part of something, we're not alone. And what we do, that interconnectedness. And Nikon sure sounds like that from all the sutras and the CWS that I'm reading. They all talk about this. So how closely does Nikon relate to Shin Buddhism?
Well, that's a great question, Michael, and it also gives me an opportunity to pass that question on to some of the Shin Buddhist ministers here. So maybe I can start with Reverend Harada, and then maybe Reverend Hirano would want to say something, and I'm not sure who else is here, but Reverend Harada, do you want to respond to that question?
Well, I think it is Shin Buddhism, and because it came from this Shin Buddhist minister who found a way to relate Jodo Shinshu in a very practical and understandable manner. So to me, he has taken what he has understood Jodo Shinshu to be and found a methodology for it. So I would say Nikon is Jodo Shinshu expressed through Reverend Ishin
Yoshimoto.
Yoshimoto, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Reverend Harada. And Reverend Hirano, or if there are other, Reverend Akahoshi, anybody else want to respond to Michael's question?
As I said in introducing you, I think that it's a very good way to secularize within the religious secularized sense of Jodo Shinshu, but for a lay person, because Ishin Yoshimoto was a lay person, businessman who was able to understand these teachings. He might have been a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, but I think that it's, for especially in our American culture, it's a good way to put this together. And then from there, if you want to get more into the doctrinal aspects, you can. But I think for practical reasons, going through Nikon is very good. It gives us as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists in America, who seems like American spirituality really is, what do I do? Nikon is something to do to understand Shinshu. And I always thought that must have been why you picked the name Todo Institute, because it sounds like to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Reverend Hirano. And anyone else want to make a comment on that question? Okay. There was somebody kind of posted, because it popped up on my screen, this question, and they said, can you circle back to the beginning of your presentation where I talked about the kind of difficulties that the world is facing and that we're facing, and kind of connect that with how Nikon can help us. And I want to respond to that, because I think that's a really important connection that I want to make sure we have before we wrap up the seminar today. So one of the things I talked about was that there's all this stuff going on in the world. I won't go through the list again. And they're not things that we can control for the most part. We can do things, we can influence things, right? We can influence the virus, in my opinion, by wearing a mask in terms of preventing more contagion, but I can't make a vaccine. So there's things I can do to actually have an effect. But for the most part, a lot of these things are out of my control. And so my response is more based on this idea of Tariki, right? Which is not trying to fix the problem, but trying to figure out how I can cope with a situation which is really outside my control. And the reason that I feel Naikan is such a great antidote is because some of the things that are coming up in our current situation in the world include things like a feeling of disconnection, right? And a feeling that of lack of support and lack of comfort, for example. Those were three of the things on my list. And when I do Naikan in a really sincere way, and when I invest some energy into it, I feel extremely supported, right? If you remember that first question, because I'm just realizing that whether it's my wife or the electricity in the house or the internet that's allowing us to be connected with this thing, or just listening to music. I have the opportunity to, through streaming, to listen to so much different kinds of music. I feel incredibly connected, and I feel very supported and very grateful. Even when I get sick or something, I have something that I can take for it. There's medicine, right? So it's an antidote to this sense that, oh, I'm disconnected, I'm isolated, and I'm not supported. Nobody's helping me. Nobody's basically doing anything to support me. So this is a wonderful way to really turn that around simply by looking at the reality of our situation. And I think that that's one aspect of how I think Naikan can be helpful to us. I think that in terms of things like anxiety and the uncertainty of the future, one of the things that I learned from looking back on my life is that there were so many times when in the moment of a really painful experience, I was just immersed in how much I was suffering. But when I looked back at that experience, there were so many times when I saw that the outcome of that suffering, when it unfolded weeks, months, years later, was something that actually benefited me in a variety of ways. A practical example being, when I had a breakup with my girlfriend, who I'd been with for 5 years, it was such a painful experience. And then as a result of that, I met Linda, my wife, and we've been married for 28 years now and have 2 children. And so I can connect so many things in my life that are wonderful right now with the blessing that I had broken up, or my girlfriend and I had broken up at that time. But in that moment, I was just really only aware of the suffering. And I think that we can see our experience where we're only aware of our suffering as being potentially one of those moments that things can unfold, and things hopefully will unfold that will show us in perspective when we look back that this was more than just suffering. And I think the whole issue of faith, which is so important, I think, in a time like this, and Shinjin in Jodo Shinshu, right? The sense that we put our trust in a power beyond ourselves. If we don't have some kind of faith in a power beyond ourselves, some kind of trust, then it's very hard to look at our situation as anything but dismal and full of despair. But when we realize that somehow we're cared for in this way, and the world is cared for in this way, it gives us some hope, right? It gives us some hope that that we can have faith that ultimately things will work out the way they need to work out. And I'm not talking about the kind of faith in which it means that no matter how bad things seem to be for me, I'm going to win the lottery or something like that. I'm just talking about a faith that there is a greater wisdom in the world, certainly, than I have personally. And that comes from looking at all the mistakes and troubles and my faults over these years. There's a much greater wisdom than that in the world. And I have faith in, whether it be people who are trying to develop treatment and vaccines. I have faith in voters who hopefully will elect someone who is capable of managing our country back to a state of health. I have faith in my wife and in my family, because they've all served me so well over the course of my life. So I think that there's a direct relationship actually between Nikon and our ability to actually lose confidence in ourselves, which sounds really strange that that would be a good thing. But that was a real great thing for me when I lost confidence in myself, because it created a space for me to have confidence in something that was beyond myself.
Greg, there's one more question that was in the chat. During the time of shelter-in-place, how can people who live alone and who have no contact with other people, perhaps for days at a time, answer and benefit from the questions that you posed?
Well, that's also a very good question. I think people who are living alone, and I know a number of those people, and a number of the people I do know who are living alone are also older people. And I used to think older people were like people in their 50s and 60s, but now to me, older people are in their like late 70s and 80s. So, so as I get older, I'm never actually one of those older people, but I know a number of those people, and I think that it's a particular challenge to be in a situation like that during the pandemic and what we're faced with right now. And I think that one of the best things you can do is to use that time for self-reflection, right? It's a wonderful opportunity to actually pull back into your heart and use it as an opportunity to reflect on your life. I had to go to Japan to be able to create a space and a time where I could spend 2 weeks reflecting on my life, 16 hours a day. But somebody can use this as an opportunity with this kind of self-reflective practice like Naikan, to be able to actually nourish their spirit by using some of that time when they are alone and isolated for the purpose of reflecting. So that to me is one of the main things I would recommend. And actually one of the uses of Naikan historically in Japan and now in China is with prisoners who are in prisons, convicts who are in prisons, who are doing Naikan as part of their way of rehabilitation in terms of their criminal acts, and but also a way to kind of become spiritually aware and be able to look at their situation with a greater amount of spiritual perspective. And I think that that term, spiritual perspective, to me is really an interesting term, that I find that there are moments, whether it comes from Naikan or reading, spiritual reading, or listening to some of the teachings from teachers like Reverend Harada or Reverend Hirano, that there's a certain comfort because it helps me step back from my life and kind of see the bigger picture, not just of my life, but of life, right? And there's a great comfort in that. It's the opposite of being caught up in a kind of angry, passionate moment where we're just really upset and angry about some little thing that somebody did to us because it seems like such a big thing. So I think it's a great opportunity for spiritual perspective and self-reflection for people who have that kind of isolation at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Greg. I know there are still a couple of questions, but we're about 5 minutes away from the 2 o'clock mark. So can I give maybe one final question? Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Yeah, I think somebody started to speak. I just
wanted to acknowledge, Greg, your also Reverend Suji, and echo that sentiment that you had toward him. He visited several of us here in the southeastern United States.
Oh, that's great.
In the early 1980s, and it was just tremendous. And then he pulled us up to the Ikoji Temple for the Sarana affirmation ceremony. So I just wanted to echo your acknowledgement of him. Thank you very much.
Yeah, John, I somehow remember your name. It's coming back to me now. Where were you located at that time?
Oh, you're muted, John. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm in Western North Carolina. Yeah, and I did give a talk up there once. So it's possible we had some indirect connection.
And did you have like a group or something?
Yeah, we have it was the Wider Shin Buddhist Fellowship, and actually Diane Ames, who's on this call also was instrumental in helping to coordinate that. That was back before the day of internet and whatnot.
Right.
We snail mail to get across. And these were isolated Shin Buddhists from all around the country that participated in our so-called wider Shin Buddhist fellowship.
Yeah, and I remember now that Reverend CG used to go to some of the southern states, and that there were groups. And I think I remember him actually mentioning your name at one point, although I can't say for sure. But now that you're starting to bring back memories from that picture and what you're saying, and I do think that
it was tremendous that he again was oriented toward doing the outreach for us who were isolated. So I just wanted again to
good. Well,
acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming. And maybe is there one other comment or question before we kind of wrap up?
I heard you talk about Shinjin and Nikon. Is Nikon the same as true and real Shinjin? That you become awakened and aware of the things around you and the people who are helping you. When you acquire Shinjin, it's like all of a sudden gratitude has a new meaning. Thankfulness has a new meaning because you see the deeper aspect of those words. So are they two in the same or different, or how do they relate to each other?
Well, that's a really simple question to ask at the end of the seminar, Michael. But what I can tell you is, in terms of just my personal response to this, is that I don't have any understanding of Shinjin as some kind of permanent or ongoing state. Okay, so I believe that it's possible, whether it's through Naikan or through other approaches, that we can have moments in which we get a spiritual glimpse of our life and ourselves and the world. Moments. And but can we actually somehow attain a state that then becomes connected to how we live the rest of our life? I have no idea if that's possible, but I do think it's possible to have a momentary glimpse of a different way of understanding life. So that's how I would respond to that question.
Once again, I want to thank Greg for this great seminar. Close with Gassho, please. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you, everyone. Please stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Yes.